Many moons ago, in a suburban middle school classroom, the air is thick with anticipation. The desks have been pushed up against the wall to make a large open space in the center. I am standing there in an itchy velvet costume, while two students next to me practice trying to stab each other with cardboard swords. The room begins to settle. And then I hear my cue from my classmates standing in the middle of the room. "Oh, wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied?" And I rush to reply, "What satisfaction canst thou have tonight?" The exchange of thy love's faithful vow for mine. We are deep in our Shakespeare unit, and I am Juliet in our class production of Romeo and Juliet. I vividly remember the energy and excitement of this first Shakespeare experience, especially the wild passion of this particular play. I can remember my 13-year-old self thinking, what would it mean to make promises like that? What would it feel like to vow yourself to another person in that way? I've been thinking a lot about this first encounter with Shakespeare recently because now my own son is in 8th grade and is reading Romeo and Juliet for the first time. And it's really different engaging this play as a parent. The spontaneous vows and the star-crossed declarations of love are no less beautiful, but now, when I read them as an adult, they can feel simultaneously profoundly moving and unrealistic, wishful, and even naive. I imagine that for many of us, reading Romeo and Juliet was the first time we were confronted with the idea of a vow, a pledge that communicates a faithful connection. Even now, we likely associate the concept of vows only with weddings or with other rare once-in-a-lifetime occasions. And yet, this night, called Kol Nidre, is literally titled All Our Vows. Year after year, on this night of Kol Nidre, we spend a lot of time listening to a prayer that references vows, promises, and oaths. Vows that we have made to one another, promises that we have made to ourselves, and perhaps, for some of us, oaths that we have made to our understanding of God. As we sit here today, with the glorious music of Kol Nidre still ringing in our ears, it seems appropriate to ask, what did we say? Kol Nidre, all vows, sworn promises, and oaths of dedication. All of these we promise and swear to God and take upon ourselves from this day of atonement until the next day of atonement. Let all of them be discarded and forgiven, abolished and undone. Our vows shall not be vows, our promises shall not be promises, and our oaths shall not be oaths. Stirring language? Not exactly. In essence, we have just proactively unpromised all of our promises for the upcoming year. How could we say that? How could we mean that? Now, to be clear, all of the vows, promises, and oaths named in the Kol Nidre prayer above have always been and continue to be only about promises we have made to ourselves and any oaths that we have made to God. These are not like the vows of Romeo and Juliet. The Kol Nidre prayer was never intended to free us from promises made to other individuals. In reciting this formula every year, we cannot and do not free ourselves from romantic partners, contracts, or charity obligations. Just as the Mishnah teaches that Yom Kippur atones only for the mistakes we make between God and ourselves and not for transgressions between us and other people, the same is true for our vows. but the text remains troubling. On Kol Nidre, we preemptively release ourselves from our most personal and spiritual promises. Now, given that most of the people in this sanctuary here have likely only ever experienced this evening with the Kol Nidre prayer, it may be surprising to know that Reform rabbis of the past recoiled at the inclusion of the Kol Nidre in the liturgy. In 1844, Brunswick, Germany, at the very first Reform rabbinical conference in history, the rabbis present abolished Kol Nidre from Reform prayer books. From 1845 until 1978, most Reform high holiday prayer books expunged the words of Kol Nidre completely. These founding Reform rabbis couldn't, in good conscience, bring themselves to print the Kol Nidre prayer. So how did Kol Nidre even arrive in our prayer book in the first place? The original idea of a cancellation of vows is found in the Talmud. One who desires that his vows not be upheld for the entire year should stand up on the high holy days and say, "Any vow that I take in the future shall be void." But the text of the Kol Nidre prayer itself is absent from Talmudic literature. It is first mentioned as a popular but unauthorized custom in Seder Rav Amram, the first compendium of Jewish liturgical laws. However, even the editor of that text describes the Kol Nidre prayer as a foolish custom. But the prayer is still here. Our holy texts have not only frowned upon the public renunciation of promises and oaths, but have also been strikingly negative about the prospect of vowing at all. In Deuteronomy, we read, "When you make a vow to God, do not put off fulfilling it, for you will incur guilt." Whereas you incur no guilt if you refrain from vowing. This is hardly a ringing endorsement for making holy promises. One of the most critical portrayals of the practice of vowing comes from the book of Judges, the famous story of the warrior Yiftach. In the middle of a great battle between Israel and the Ammonites, Yiftach becomes inflamed with fury and fear and frenzy, and Yiftach makes an oath to God. "If you deliver the Ammonites into my hands, God, then whatever first comes out of the door of my house to meet me on my safe return shall be yours, and I shall offer it as a burnt offering." And then Yiftach destroys the Ammonites. When he arrived home, who should come out of his house but his only daughter, coming to meet him with victorious song. With heart-breaking anguish, Yiftach cries, "You, my daughter, have broken me, for I have made an oath to God and cannot retract it." And then he actually sacrifices his daughter, all because of his impulsive oath. The story of Yiftach stands as a cautionary tale, a powerful warning against making careless oaths to God. Clearly, our tradition is suspect about both making promises and the idea of a universal renunciation of vows, and yet, while our minds recoil, perhaps our emotional selves feel differently. In a discussion about the eventual inclusion of the Kol Nidre text into the 1978 Reform High Holiday Prayer Book, Gates of Repentance, Rabbi Richard S. Saracen noted that the willingness to reconsider the inclusion of Kol Nidre in the North American Reform liturgy was a reflection of a more visceral connection to Jewish religious and cultural traditions. The desire for the experience of Kol Nidre was emotional, not intellectual. And maybe our emotional connection to this entire concept of promising and unpromising is why we have never been able to let go of the Kol Nidre prayer. We are enraptured by the act of promising. We love to vow and swear and take an oath. In fact, one of the ways to read and understand that the tradition's obsession with warning against vowing is to assume that the prohibitions are so strong precisely because people were haphazardly vowing all over the place. We still do that today. How many of us have found ourselves saying things like, I swear I'm going to throw out all of the Legos in this house, when you know that you won't. Or even, as God is my witness, I will never waste this much time watching the British baking show again. And how many of us really do this with our favorite sports team? I promise that since I was wearing my orange jersey while sitting on the middle cushion of the couch when the Broncos scored the winning touchdown, that I will always now wear my orange jersey and sit on the middle cushion while watching every Broncos game for the rest of the season. In that moment, we desperately want to feel like our promises to ourselves, the strength of our commitments, really can change the world. We crave control. Dr. Herbert Schlesinger, in his book, Promises, Oaths, and Vows on the Psychology of Promising, posits that when we make promises, even to ourselves, we are actually engaging subconsciously in an attempt to control the future. When we feel a situation around us or in the world in general spinning out of control, we use promises and oaths to grasp for solidity. We can't help ourselves because promising makes us feel better. Often, in these moments of emotional vulnerability, when the words, I swear, or never again, or I promise I will always, rashly come rushing out of our mouths, we hurt ourselves. We allow the fear or the anger or the bitterness inside of us to explode out, and the feelings almost articulate the words for us. And then the promise itself becomes the reality. And sometimes that oath has consequences. Yiftach didn't stand in the middle of the battlefield, think rationally about all of the options of who or what could come out of his door, and then conclusively decide that this oath was the right thing to say. He stood petrified in the battle and righteously enraged at the Ammonites, and he opened his mouth, and the feelings came out. We too let our feelings speak for us in moments of passion. Earlier this year, I had a heartbreaking conversation with a woman during a pastoral counseling session. She had a dear friend from childhood, someone who had been with her through wonderful moments in her wedding party, couples vacations, and someone who had been with her through hard moments as well, when her child was struggling in college, a scary health diagnosis for her husband. Through all of these life experiences, they had supported one another without shame, without judgment. And yet, since October 7th and the days after, they found themselves arguing constantly on opposite sides of the conversation about the war in Gaza, the attack on Iran, and the war in Lebanon. And in a moment of heat, after a particularly biting comment, she said to her friend, "If you say that one more time, I will never talk to you again." And she did. And they haven't spoken in 6 months. And she desperately misses her. And now she realizes how much of an anchor this friend is in her life, but she can't bring herself to go back on her promise to herself, even though she is starting to realize that never was a step too far. We entrap ourselves in inflexible promises. Schlesinger also points out that often the sanctity of promises in our value system becomes identified with morality itself. We let the promise itself become a mark of our resolve and our strength rather than allowing ourselves to look back from a cooler vantage point and decide if the content of the promise is still valuable to us. Each year, Kol Nidre gives us just that opportunity, and we must not be afraid. Softening the harshness of the emotionally charged promises that we let slip through our lips does not force us to relinquish principle or our ethical core. We simply release the vow. We release ourselves from the never or the always. Recently, I was speaking with an older man from my previous congregation in New York who lost his adult son. He shared with me that in the week after his son's death, he made an oath to God to visit his son's grave at the cemetery every day. And now he himself is sick and is unable to make it to the cemetery every day. He is tortured by the idea that he is violating his oath. He is fixated on the promise part and his inability to complete that promise. We spoke about the original idea of the oath. What was his intention? Aside from being in deep grief at the time, what did he hope would come out of that commitment? He realized that he wanted to make sure that he could still remember his son and feel close to his memory. And then he was able to let go of the everyday part, the always part. He released the always. And now he can find a different way back to connecting to his son's memory. While we might feel intellectually awful at the idea of releasing ourselves from our promises, often that overturning can be emotionally needed and secretly welcome. We want the release. We yearn for the chance to let some of the burden go. Because how else can we release ourselves from the promises that start to feel unhealthy? And so tonight, I ask you, what have you vowed over this past year with hardened hearts like Pharaoh in the story of Passover? And do you have the courage, the wisdom, and the compassion for yourself to let those vows go? What are the promises that you have the courage to release this year? What are the resolutions that you made in a moment of excessive pride that you have the wisdom to let go of this year? What are the commitments that you have uttered out of sharp fear or desperation that you have the compassion for yourself to forgive this year? Relinquishing our promises, our oaths, especially the private ones to ourselves, freeing ourselves from the intensity of those commitments is not easy. And that is why our tradition reminds us that you cannot renounce an oath or cancel a promise alone. You need other people around you. We release each other. Tonight, we look around, and in a moment of self-awareness and honesty, we see that in the midst of the Kol Nidre prayer, everyone is desperately trying to reevaluate their promises and oaths to themselves and to God, the ones we made this past year, the ones we envision we might make this upcoming year, the ones we know we made, the ones we don't remember, and the ones we can't yet even imagine because they will happen in moments beyond our control. In that moment, we can be the mechanism of release for one another. We can be each other's witnesses and say first to ourselves, release me. And then to everyone around us, I release you. The Talmud teaches that in order to release ourselves from vows, we need a petach, an opening. We need a moment of self-awareness, perspective, or even just regret. What would it feel like to use the words of Kol Nidre not only as a moment of self-forgiveness tonight, but also as words that can leave with us this evening, follow us throughout the year, and when we need it, urge us to open. Tonight, in honor of the 3 times that we traditionally hear the Kol Nidrei prayer, I stand here and say to you and for you and with you, Kol Nidrei, all our vows, our promises, our oaths, any whispered words of surety made from places of high emotion or deep despair, miyom HaKippurim she'avar ad yom HaKippurim hazeh, whether they be from last Yom Kippur to this Yom Kippur, the ones that are already weighing us down, miyom Kippurim zeh ad Yom Kippurim haba, or from this Yom Kippur to next Yom Kippur, the ones we have yet to rush into. Kulhon yahon petichan. For all these vows, may we have the courage to open them. Nidrana lo nidre, may we have the strength to say these vows cannot bind us. The esara lo esare, may we have the wisdom to say these promises are not serving us. Rachamin al nafshatana lo sharirin velo kayamim. May we have the compassion on ourselves and on all those around us to grant release. Shana Tova.